Good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to thank Omar for inviting me here. It's very exciting to people. Apparently, people want to hear what I think, which is unusual. So it's nice to be invited. So, firstly, I think hopefully I want to answer why I think hopefully you might want to listen to what I have to say. So I'm a third year in electrical and electronic engineering. I see some of our academic staff here, so I'll be nice. There we go, there's the head of department, so you're mentioned in it, don't worry.
I'm not worried.
I think Triple E is an interesting course because it is undoubtedly quite a hard course, and so from observing my peers, I think you can take some interesting insights into how students learn nowadays. I've actually spent 2 summers interning in startups, and I think that's really interesting because in a small organisation you have to very quickly understand what the problem is and you have to come up with a solution to it. So it's been quite interesting watching the kind of pinch points from students that we see today, and actually how do they go about it, what do they do to get around that. And so some of that I've applied on campus already. So TeachBack is a system to provide feedback on GTAs, much like we have Sol here for lecturers. So if anyone wants to talk to us about putting that in their department, to come catch me afterwards. And so yeah, like I said, I've seen people learn, and so I think that's really what I want to get across today. This is all from what I've seen and what I've interpreted. Now, I think this is an interesting case from Yale, if anyone's ever heard of it. So the Yale Blue Book is a system which is just a list of courses which Yale do. Now these rather entrepreneurial undergraduates decided that it wasn't very good. And so they decided to build their own version, except with student feedback in it as well. Now, Yale didn't like that because effectively it allowed students to understand which courses might score a better average than others. And so they were effectively told very quickly to remove it or they'd face expulsion. But I think really this highlights an interesting problem. The point is that a university should be there to help its students, I believe, and I do hope you agree with me in that. And so really we have to ask, how can we engage with students to prevent this sort of thing? How can we work with them to build something in which creates this? And I think that's really the open question I'd like to leave with you. So firstly, I'm going to apologise because Omar said to me that we want to be forward-thinking, but every student I've spoken to has told me to talk about what we do at the moment, so I'm afraid I'm going to very briefly cover that, but we'll move on quickly. We'll then look at actually how do students find content? What do they do? What's their behavioural pattern like? How we deliver lectures, can we deliver them in a better way to students? And I think this has been covered quite a lot, but it's still interesting from our point of view. And also, how do we engage with the class, even if it's a physical class here within a university? I think the key thing is, from what I've seen, students want to do, they want to do lots of things, but in the context of today, they want to learn. And they will use any resource, they will take any method they can to do that. Whether that's taking slides straight from a lecture, whether that's going to the library, whether that's using Google, they will find some way to learn. And so the question is, as Imperial, how do we want to sit in this process of learning? Do we want to be the library? Do we want to be the search engine? How do we want to help them learn? Because if we don't, other people will, is the reality of the internet now. So briefly about our current provisions. Unfortunately, this is what students are faced with when they try to log on if you go to the wrong address. Now, even as a 21-year-old guy who knows how to build web apps, I know we can avoid this, and my websites don't do that. And I think from a student's point of view, this is not a great kind of way to engage with e-learning. That's the unfortunate reality. Now, I've seen about everyone see this page when they try to enroll, and then they click that page, and then they get logged out. and again, it's just, unfortunately, I'm sorry to kind of highlight this, but this is what students perceive as e-learning. When I told my friends I'm talking about e-learning, they said, so you're going to do 25 minutes on Blackboard and why it's terrible? And I said, well, we need to try and think a little beyond that. But I think it really highlights the point, though. That is what students perceive as e-learning. And if you want to take them beyond that, we really need to innovate beyond this, I feel. Now, hopefully it gets more interesting from here. So this is our library. This is in theory our information hub. It's where we collect our resources from. It's where we learn. It's where we embellish our lectures. But actually, from what I see, I think we've got a new library. And really, if you look at when someone's stuck, when they want to learn, where do they go? That is where they go. We've had multiple lectures from various academics and librarians telling us how Google's terrible. But like it or not, this is what students do. And so if we're on Google, that's good. If we're not, we're not on the radar. And the sad reality from our point of view is that 9 times out of 10, I think it's an American resource. I'll quote one of my friends who said that he felt somewhat disappointed that he felt he learned more from some of his courses from MIT than he did from Imperial. And we really have to question why that is and how we can change that, and if we want to change it. So it's either MIT or Khan Academy. That's the reality, that they have such nice nugget-sized videos that people find it very easy to catch up with things. The particular reality is that students revise before exams. And so when it comes to learning quickly, Khan Academy gives them a way to do that. And like it or not, that's what we do. Now, it gives us a surprising amount of joy when we search for certain terms and we find our own lecturers on there. So in fact, yes, here's Professor Chung, our head of department. Convolution tables, he's got the first slide on. And you'd be surprised as to the looks on people's faces and how happy they are when they get that. Even last week, someone was looking for something in one course, and he even sent me a screenshot with, yay, someone from Imperial was on the top list. Surprising. I don't know why, but people really enjoy that. Again, here's Mike Brooks, the resident kind of genius in our department, and he's got this kind of encyclopedia of knowledge on his website, which is publicly accessible, and well, it's just brilliant, really. And so then I question, what do we need to do to be there? And the answer is, we just need one page with links to slides. Now, again, from a student's point of view, this is currently the pinnacle of e-learning at Imperial. You go to one URL, everything's there, and you can click, and within one click, you've got all of your information. With other e-learning platforms, you have to click, click, click. It's just, to quote one lecturer, it's just a very glorified file storage system. And so, if that's what you want from it, fine. But if you want to just serve slides, I think this is much more effective. And for one thing, it kind of gets you on the internet more. But I think this raises a bigger issue, actually, is that should we be locking our content down? Because students, when they see our content on the internet, it gives them a certain pride and it gives them a certain kind of satisfaction that Imperial seem to be leading the way. And the real question is, does locking down content change the quality? And I think Anthony covered this slightly. But the 2 people in our department who are known for kind of leaving everything on the internet, I'd say, anecdotally from what we see, produce some of the best content. I don't know whether that's linked or whether it's coincidental, but it's what I've seen. Now, the next question, of course, is whether we want it to be easily accessible. So, is locking it down just fundamentally good? Do we want our people or everyone to benefit from our notes? And then, of course, you question, should these be something to learn on their own, or should they be kind of materials to help a particular lecture module? And those are questions I think are a little beyond me. And that does leave the final question is, if lecturers want to put them behind password-protected systems, does that mean that they don't want the public seeing what they do? Really, the way I understand it as an academic, as a teacher and a researcher. And so on their webpage, as well as just listing their research and their papers, perhaps they should also be listing their teaching materials and their notes. I'd also like to talk a little bit about videos, which I know have been covered, but again, from a student point of view, this is really what we see. So this is Professor David Mackey from Cambridge. I don't know if anyone's ever seen this. He does information theory, and this is he doesn't even teach it as a module, he just enjoys teaching it. So he recorded 20 lectures on this, and they're all on the internet. And the fact that he's got 2 screens, one of which stays on the problem he's put up or some slides he's prepared, that stays there, and the camera follows him around as he runs around doing maths, and it's quite interesting to watch. It's worth looking into. I think even that, people here at Imperial say, well, we're not quite there yet, and that's what disappoints students. But I think we have to question, as has been discussed with MOOCs, do we have a new kind of lecture theatre? And whilst the benefit of MOOCs as a way of educating millions of people, I think, is very much still up for discussion, again, as a student, what we do know is that MOOCs are very engaging. When you want to learn something, they have a very different approach to a lecture for an hour. And actually, while I'm here, I'd really like to question why we have lectures for an hour. I mean, is there any scientific data which says that an hour is a good length of time to take in information? Because I'm a bit special, I agree, but it takes me a very long, an hour is just, yeah, it's just too long. It's not fun. But the lecturers are really good. And Sebastian Thrun, I think, as you all probably know, is a very interesting character. This is a bit Apple-like, to apologise. But he's really interesting because he started this when he was at Stanford as a way of propagating his materials out. But the side effect, and I think this is what's really interesting, is that he ran his AI lectures, so his artificial intelligence lectures, at the same time as he ran his online course. And what he found was that a lot of his students preferred learning at home, watching his videos, than they did actually turning up to his lectures. And I think that's an interesting stat we should be looking at. And I mean, even if we watch this, now this video should play, even if we watch this, just the engagement we can see from, let me just slide along. Like, you've effectively got your own tutor, I think, in some senses. You've got a man solving a problem here right now. And actually, I know one maths lecturer we had back in our first year did a similar thing with a pen recording. And that in itself is quite engaging if you want to see how to solve a particular problem. So I think this is where we need to be looking for e-learning. Whether it's just to Imperial or via MOOCs to the rest of the world, I leave up to you. But students like this. I'd also like to talk about, which has been discussed, emails, and actually how do we engage the class as a community and with our lecturer. I think most lecturers probably feel like this fella here, and even as a student I feel like that sometimes happens. And so really there has to be a better way than this. I think we're beyond emails now, and fundamentally emails are pretty locked down. They're between me and whoever else is receiving that, so the rest of the class can't benefit from this knowledge. So it's not good for me. Well, it's not good for the rest of the class, and it's not good for the lecturer because he probably has about 100 identical emails sitting in his inbox waiting to be answered. So, and there are other interesting platforms. I know we shouldn't talk operations, but the fact is they're out there. This is Nodium, which is in fact founded by a graduate from our department of electrical engineering and an aeronautical engineering graduate. And what I think was, if I'm honest, disappointing from a student's perspective was I learned a couple of weeks ago that they've got an agreement with another leading London university, who shall remain nameless, to trial in their entire faculty of engineering. And those founders from Imperial, and yet Imperial's not adopting it, we have to ask, what are we doing differently which is better than that if we're not going to be using it? And we've already started using Piazza, which is an American alternative. I mean, this was one of our maths courses this year, and again, it's a very engaging way for the lecturer to post updates, and the key thing is that people ask questions and then we can all see the questions and see his answers. And that's what makes it so interesting, really. Now, I want to say that I think whenever you're thinking about e-learning, I'd like you to think like students. Be ready to experiment. See what works best, and don't be afraid to do things twice. I think you have to pivot and experiment to get things right. I think it's better to have failed 3 times and find the perfect solution than to invest 4 times the amount of effort into one thing which may not be as optimal actually as what comes out if you try and fail a few times. I think that's really what students would like to think. Yeah, so in that sense, like I say, students really want to see people experimenting and to new things to come out. I think that's really what they see as being the way forward. And so in that sense, I really encourage you to let students help think about what you want next and to actually help you build things. There's a very vibrant community within Imperial who I think can contribute a lot to this debate and discussion. Now, students may not make decisions based on data, but I think that's really important. So rather than having kind of very abstract debates about what may be the case, experiment, collect data, and then figure out what you want to do based on that. I think that's really key. So it turns out this presentation is surprisingly quick. So I'll come on to my last slide. When I was looking for images, this came up, which I thought was quite appropriate somehow. But I'd invite any questions, or we can go to tea early.
You're going to make your slides available to us?
Yeah, I was going to put them on SlideShare after this.
This is being recorded. We can open.
Oh, it is, okay.
Question back.
Thank you very much for your interesting presentation. My name is Max. I'm a postgraduate student at the business school. And I just wanted to know, would you agree that content of the information itself becomes less important, actually? It's more about the experience actually at the university. What's of paramount importance in the future?
So if I understand you correctly, it's less about the actual content of slides and so on, but more about what we gain from it. I think that's very valid. Someone said to me recently that if we can get so much information from the internet, why do we come into Imperial every day? What do we get out of physically sitting in a lecture which we couldn't get out of anything off the internet? And that is a question I think you have to be able to answer if you want to actually attract people. Other than a brand name, what's learning now? It's on the internet and it's freely available. So you're right, it's about that experience.
Julie.
So you've encouraged everyone to experiment. How's that going to impact on you when, at the end of the day, you want to get a degree, you've got assessments to do, student satisfaction? Is that going to be impacted by lots of lecturers deciding, well, I'm going to experiment with CATSA and this one's going to use this system? How's that going to impact on students?
That's a very good question. So from what we see in EEE, Blackboard usage is pretty much let's upload slides, let's maybe do a test, and that's pretty much what we see of it. And so from our point of view, we can upload slides onto a website. Blackboard for slide distribution is not optimal. And so in that sense, I think we would rather people experimented with funkier ways of distributing slides than to use Blackboard for that. As for other means, I can't really comment because I haven't seen other use cases, but certainly from what we see, we haven't seen e-learning take the forward peg, as it were. It's more backing up what's been distributed in lectures.
But do you want to be used as guinea pigs? I mean, you say yes,
I think student.
but ultimately you've got assessments to complete. You want to get a good mark, and if those experiments may impact on that, student satisfaction may drop, and that would be one of our concerns.
Well, I think the answer is controlled experimentation, so not letting rip with everything, but a trial group. And I think at the moment it feels like things are very slow. Change is very slow to enact. In fact, doing anything, any new system seems to take a long time to roll out. And I think that's one of the perceived problems, that Imperial's not quick enough to be able to deploy things, is one of the issues we've observed. That I remember here as an undergraduate, people talking about video lecturing, and only this year it's now physically in the department, but not everyone actually uses it yet.
Yep, and then Jeremy.
Just come.
Go ahead.
Okay, so just coming on that same issue, it's often the case, isn't it, that innovation and experiment is asked to prove itself in a way that existing practice isn't, and perhaps a possible partial reply to Julie's question would be to ask the same question of what we already do, to ask the same question of the practice of putting slides and lecture notes on Blackboard, and to wonder whether therefore whether something else that we might do could possibly take us down from there.
There's a good example of so one of our lecturers uses Piazza, solely uses Piazza. And some first years decided they didn't like having two logins, so they asked him to put it all on Blackboard. And he said, well, I can do, but I will merely use this as a file repository. Don't expect any conversation from me. He says, Piazza works better for my classes, and if you look at his older years, I've looked at all of his materials from our course, it does work a lot better in that use case. So he, in a way, has kind of already experimented with that, found it works, and used it.
Jeremy, next.
Yeah, okay. Just very briefly then. So I think in common with a lot of my colleagues, we're very insecure people, and so we think, well, we put lots of information online, we do all the videoing and everything like that, and then nobody comes to our lectures, and what a disaster that would be. What do you think has been sort of the thing we should be doing to still get people to come to the lectures? What's the extra thing we should add to make it exciting and innovative and get the turnout stuff?
I think, as I mentioned, I personally, I think the concept of 1 hour of being talked at by someone, it's just not how we think nowadays. Omar said he has to compete for attention with their iPads and iPhones, and it's the same in lectures. It's difficult to compete for attention. So I think the traditional, personally, and this is very personal, I'm sure lots of people will disagree, but I think the concept of a 1 hour delivery of a lecture is not perhaps ideal anymore. I think is the answer.
What would you suggest?
Well, yeah, that's a harder question. So, yeah, I mean, personally, for one thing, I think actually knowing when to pause properly, actually, because lots of lecturers will go non-stop for a good 50 minutes, and by half an hour you're lost. And so knowing when to pause, I think so. Lots of lecturers like to have a 10-minute break in a 2-hour lecture, but you know, an hour is still a long time. I think every half an hour, every 20 minutes, just pause, even if it's 30 seconds, let people catch up. Otherwise, once you get behind in the lecture, you're just lost. So little things like that, and actually that's why videos are good, because they're 15 minutes tops, and you can pause it whenever you like. I mean, there's something to be said for that.
Let's have
Sorry.
one final question.
Could I just follow up on that? I help run a part-time master's, so the students just come here 1 day a week. They do an awful lot of distance learning, and they use Panopto to review and to stop and start. So one of them said to me a year ago, in a normal lecture, if I get lost 30 minutes in, the next 30 minutes is a complete waste of time. If I do it on video, I stop it, get the textbook out, I read the lecture notes, understand it, and then I move on, and I'm not wasting my time. And they're basically giving a message. These 1-hour chunks are not a smart way of teaching, especially if it's just one-way delivery, because you can do that in the video. This is simply one-way delivery, where the students got more control about how much of a chunk they take in bit by bit. What do you do to get people to come to the lecture room? You do something totally different face to face. You use the opportunity for two-way interaction. You set case studies. You start actually giving people real problems to solve rather than just knowledge to absorb. Sorry, that's what I try to do.
I think he knows more than me.
So I think it's probably time to maybe thank Tom for a fantastic talk.